We're muted.
Recorded. Okay, I think we're going to be doing lots of.
Oh, beg your pardon.
Yeah. Too many. Yeah, we're good. We're good to go. Good. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and anyone else who's watching.
You know who you are.
You know who you are. I'm just going to put in the chat. Oh, wait, actually, I won't put in the chat to check the sources. I'll do it in just a moment. But I'll also share my screen. I'm still torn between the feedback I get is if I share my screen, then it's hard for me to interact with you. But if I don't share my screen, not everyone has the sources easily to see. And then, so it's a bit of both. So I'll share and I'll unshare, but I'll put the sources. I think that went out on the email this morning, the sources as well.
I can't hear it.
Stanley, can you put yourself on mute now?
Put it on.
There you go. What was I saying? Right. So continuing our theme on ethical situations in Jewish law and in Jewish practice, this one's of interest. And this one came about because of a question that was asked to a rabbi. So this is actually based on a particular scenario. And so I'll share with you the brief story of what actually happened in this case, but we can apply it in general. And what I want to do is first have a very then brief discussion about what we think the answer should or would be. And after that, take you through a few of the disputes, because if it was that simple, we wouldn't need a share. And it's very important to realize that Jewish law has an opinion, of course, on everything, on most things. And even when it feels or appears it should be obvious, there's a difference between, and this is actually what we were discussing the other day with the ladies group, there is a difference between what Halacha teaches us is the thing that you should do, which is different sometimes from be a mensch. And that is different. Not that Halacha doesn't treat people like a mensch, God forbid. It just means that Halacha is drawing the lines of what is the acceptable, appropriate behavior within the borders of Jewish law, within the borders, the scope of Torah. But sometimes that means that really, even though Jewish law will tell us X or Y, we should still also use our hearts to know that and then feel that even if I'm not obligated in particular areas, I should still be a mensch. And I'm just prefacing that with everything that we're going to say now, because and again, as I said the other day, sometimes when deciding matters of Jewish law, you have to remove your hearts and go with your head, because you have to think logically, and everything has to be applied to scenarios. You know, the Jewish law is written thousands of years ago, where there wasn't iPhones and fancy Zoom computers and all those kind of things. It was written with earthenware vessels and oxen, and we have to take those and apply them to today. So that was my bit of a hakdama, a bit of an introduction to the topic. So the Shaila here, please welcome to the Beth Din of Belmont. Okay, you guys, we're going to decide how to do this. The Rabbi, Rebbitzins, friends, lend me your ear. This is the following scenario. A man who was relatively old and had, this is exactly what happened according to how this Rav presented it. And a man who was old, who had some form of dementia or something like that, his family sold his house because he had to move out into a home. So they sell the house. And they sell this house. This is we're assuming now for the purpose of everyone's Jewish in this scenario. It just makes halacha easy. So this Jewish man sells, or the family of this man sells the house to another man. So we have the original owner. Then we have this man who we're talking about now. And this man lives in this house for 7 years. After which he decides, nice house, not for him. He actually wants to move and live in a different area. He then sells the house. So we're going to call the first guy the original owner, or the O for original. We're going to call the second guy Reuven, for want of a better name. And he sells it to Shimon. He sells it to another person. After a number of years, Shimon, who is the first person that actually has the house now, and you can see where this is going based on the title, right? Shimon now And then, the messages are going backwards and forwards. How does the heating work? Do you still want your post? There's always a question or two about, where the stopcock is for the sink, for the water. Shimon says in an email exchange to Reuven, he said, what did you ever make of the safe in the secret room? Now, Reuven does not know what this Shimon is talking about. So it turns out that when Reuven bought the house of the original owner, this old man with dementia's family, there was a secret closet cabinet in, I think, the bathroom, wherever it was, in a room in the house that actually was unbeknown to Reuven. And inside this little secret compartment room was actually a safe. And the safe was kind of drilled into the foundations of the house. And inside the safe was, who knows? Shimon has found the safe, found the room, isn't quite sure what to do. So asks Reuven, and Reuven doesn't know. So in order to complete the story, the question is asked, whatever's inside the safe, it could be anything from the deeds to the house to, I don't know, previous United Synagogue rabbis, to treasure, whatever's in that safe, who does it belong to? Who does it belong to? Cynthia's waving at me. Go for it, Cynthia. Unmute thyself.
The original man.
Okay, why?
Well, he obviously put the safe in originally, and whatever was in it, he put in. So he knew it was his. Reuven didn't even know if it existed, so it couldn't have been belonged to him. He didn't even find it.
Is there anything? I think Doreen is waving at the camera, saying she's agreeing with Cynthia. Neil Livingston is now waving at me, so we're going to give Neil an opportunity to speak. You have to unmute. There you go, Neil.
Yes, the premise on Cynthia's assuming is that the previous owner brought the second previous owner was the one that had put the safe in, but how do we know it was him and not someone before that?
Gewaldic. Okay, good. So Neil's saying, okay, everyone waving at me, you're all going to get a turn. You're all going to get a turn, don't worry. So just to confirm, Cynthia says it's a vada, not the person that currently owns it. It's a vada, for sure not the person, the middleman, Reuven. It belongs to the original owner. Neil's saying, who says it even belongs to the original owner? Maybe it's, 2,000 years old. Maybe not quite 2,000 years old. I did say Liz was next.
Sorry, Neil has said more or less what I was going to say, that unless you go and check back with the family who sold the house on behalf of gentleman O, you don't know that it was his strong room. And surely if it was his safe area, they would have known to go and look in it.
Good. Thank you for that, Liz. Now we're going to go to Salvador and then Bernice, because I can see you waving at me, and then Bernard. So Salvador.
I think that whatever is in the house belongs to the last owner, particularly that he has lapsed more than 7 years or 7 years. But
wait, you're saying it belongs to the middle guy?
No, to the last.
The latest, the person that actually found it.
Yes. Whoever is the current owner, it belongs to him. When you buy a property, particularly after a number of years, when you buy a property, you buy the property. Normally under English law, you have to specify what contents you leave and what you take. So if that's not specified and nobody says, well, I'm leaving it or whatever, it belongs to the current owner.
Okay, very good. So we have a different opinion now to what was being presented. Adkan, that finders, keepers, you bought the property, you bought everything that goes into it. Bernice and then Bernard.
I agree with Salvador that probably in English law, the latest owner owns it. Mm-hmm. But I would like to think that he would like to have a look and see what's in there and then return it to whoever it belongs to if it's something that's really precious.
Amazing. Bernard, thank you for that. Bernard.
Does it make any difference if the previous owners were non-Jewish?
Excellent point. Probably, but we're not going to deal with that today. Good point. Good point. Especially if you've got to go back and see. But that's going to be a part of this journey, because even if that's true, we're going to see what some of the say. Anyone else want to say anything before we have a look at some of the sources? Doreen's waving at me or waving at someone else on the screen. I can't work it out.
I was thinking, and I know it's a dangerous thing for me to do, but as the man that left had dementia, did he actually know that it was there or remember it was there? And if he didn't remember, then when the house was sold, his family wouldn't have known. Maybe his family didn't know about it either, because they'd never told them. Beautiful.
That's a very valid and a point that is going to come up. Also in the chat, we are assuming there is something still in the safe. Yes, and we are assuming something is still in the safe. And let's just assume, because this is based on a real story, and unfortunately, we're never going to find out what happened in that case. It's like one of those movies that ends and they don't quite answer the questions. You're like, so we're kind of like with that, but at least we're going to get a shear out of it. So we're going to answer the case if it was asked to us. I'm going to dump these source sheets that I've got. There's a lot in there, and we're not going to go through everything. It's just good. It's a shear, right? So we need to go through some of the sources, but I'm also going to share my screen. So if you feel like looking at the screen, if you're looking at the, we're going to start with a Shulchan Aruch, which I'm not going to share with you. Bear with me. Just a quick introductory Shulchan Aruch, which you should. I hope you can see that. Yeah, you can see that. Good. So this Shulchan Aruch, we're not going to read the whole thing. It's really to highlight the point. This is based on actually based on the Gomorrah in what we call the Bavas. There are three Bavas of the Gomorrahs: the Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Basra. The first, the middle, and the end. And they're all dealing with damages and ownership and how to sell and buy and all that kind of stuff. And deep in the middle of Bava Basra, which is the last one, there is a chapter called Ha-Moicha Es Habayis, right? Someone that sells their house. And the Shulchan Aruch is basically taking from that Gemara and says as follows: Ha-Moicha Es Habayis Mocha Kol Hadvarim Hagvoyim. Right? The person that sells their home also sells everything inside, pretty much everything inside of it. Kagoyin, like the doors, right? So, and by the way, everything we're speaking about in this Shulchan Aruch, the assumption is this is when it's not specified. Now, I've never owned a house. I've never sold a house. I know we need to get on a property ladder. I'm in my 40s now. I'll take responsibility. That's not today's shit. But for those of you that have bought, I think we've got an expert actually. I saw. Let me have a look. There, he's smiling now. He's half grinning. Think, oh, don't look at me. Alan Golden, ladies and gentlemen, an expert in the art of buying and selling properties in the Jewish community. Alan, I'm waiting for the book. I'm desperate to read the book with all the names changed, of all your experiences, right? But you'll correct me if I'm wrong. But when you buy and sell a house, firstly, there'll be things that are stipulated that are formulated as part of the sale. But there's things that aren't specifically written into the sale. Like the assumption is that when you're buying the house, the doors come with the house. Anything that's fixed, so this is what the Shulchan Aruch is basically saying. Anything that is fixed in the house, he says it here, the cement, anything that's cemented in to the house, that is assumed to be along with the sale. So if you have a built-in something, that built-in something, the wardrobe, let's say you have a nice built-in walk-in wardrobe, that comes with the house. You have a built-in oven system, that comes with the house. Again, unless it's specified, but the tables and the chairs, no. So they're not necessarily built into that. The fridge, it's a nice shiler there, is the fridge. And so it depends. And again, I like to think that most of these things are discussed at the outset of the sale. Now, while we're on the topic, the Gemara and then all the Halacha have a machlokes, have a dispute. What if something's nailed into the house, right? So it's not quite fixed permanently like something that is like genuinely attached to the walls or attached to the floor, like the chimney, right? What if it's nailed in? What common Jewish item is nailed into the house, into the walls? Go on, Barbie, you're shouting at the screen. The mezuzah, is that what you're saying? The mezuzah, beautiful. It's like I wanted you to say that. I didn't want you to say that because the next couple of sources are all about mezuzahs. Because while we're on the topic, it's fascinating. So we're going to put this in parentheses because it's a part of this conversation, right? Now, Hilchos Mezuzah, the laws of Mezuzah, is very clear. Pretty much, if you sell your house to a Jewish buyer, Alan, I won't put you on the spot. If you sell, ask everyone. If you sell your house to Shona, can you take the mezuzahs with you, or should you leave them?
Leave them.
Leave them.
Leave them.
Leave them. Right now, Nachon, correct. Says Hilchos Mezuzah. If you are, I think that's the next source, which I'm not going to put up back on the screen. You buy your house or buy a house from a chaver, from a fellow yid. Obviously, if you're buying it for a non-Jew, the mezuzah there, that's a different shaila. Okay, interesting. It's probably happened, right? But if you're buying your house from a fellow Jew, the soicha is chayev. He's obligated to leave. Right, to leave, or if you're renting it, really, if you're renting it as well, you obviously. I'll read the English. If one rents a house from one's friend, the renter must affix a mezuzah to the house and repair the place where it's affixed. So if I rent a house from anyone, I need to put mezuzahs up. Of course, it's my obligation because I'm renting the house. And if I make damage, I have to fix the damage that is caused. And we're going to jump down a little bit. And when the renter leaves, she does not take the mezuzah with, if, I'm sort of paraphrasing, if the second person is also a Jew. What should happen in that stage, in that case, is really you should be reimbursed for the cost of the kaf, the cost of the mezuzahs. However, that's where this gets interesting. One issue is an issue in mezuzah, what the right thing to do with the mezuzah is, and the other issue is the din in chesed mishpat, and a din in monetary issues. So the other question therefore becomes is, who do the mezuzahs now belong to, and who gets the money for them? And that's why this is interesting. If you're going to tell me, and we're jumping through some of the sources because it's already 20 past 8, right? If you're telling me, I've got to get this right in my head as well, that things that are nailed into the wall are included in the sale, what does that mean? That means not only are the mezuzahs, because of the Hilchos Mezuzah, should be left, they now belong financially to the new owner. However, if you tell me that things that are nailed in do not belong to the new owner, what does that mean? That means because of the halacha of mezuzah that you should leave it, the guy who's selling the house has to leave it. But because they don't belong to the guy in the sale, on top of that, the person needs to pay for the mezuzahs. You hear the difference? I love Jewish law. It's gewaldic, right? It's so nuanced, but it's so important how we behave. Okay, be a mensch, always pay for the mezuzah, right? But we're dealing with what does halacha actually stipulate is the appropriate thing to do. I'll say it one more time. If you're going to tell me that things that are nailed into the wall are transferred in the sale, by virtue of the fact the new buyer has bought everything, the mezuzahs automatically in the sale of the house belong to the new buyer. And therefore, they don't have to pay any more money. If they don't, the guy has to leave them there. So now he has to pay extra he or she has to pay extra for the mezuzah. Is that clear? That was just a side point. It was just interesting. So I included it in the shit. We go forward. Now, it's the first page done. So up until now, right, what have we said? Everything that is fixed into the house, attached, cemented into the house, is included in the sale. And there is now a dispute to what is nailed in, but any of the metalton, any of the stuff, the beds and the fridge and, I don't know, the dining room chairs, that is subject to the discretion of, if it's left, I can have it, because, unless it's stipulated. But I can also take it because it's mine, because it's a movable object. So if that's the case, let's cut out the middleman in this story, because actually I didn't see anywhere. There is one opinion that talks about Reuven and about his acquisition, how that might, but I think we're going to overcomplicate things, so we'll leave that today. Let's just assume this is a simple case of the new buyer. So based on what we have said, who, until now, it's going to get a little bit more complicated, but until now, who does the treasure belong to? Does it belong to the original owner, his family, or does it belong to the new buyer based on what we said? Salvador, go for it.
It belongs to the new buyer because it's fixed.
Oh, because the safe is fixed into the building. Now, if the safe wasn't, let's just say there was a secret room and it was a suitcase full of cash or gems. What would you say? Would that change your opinion?
Yes.
Right. For anyone disagree with Salvador, it would appear to be, if we were to stop the share now, it's all down, which is, by the way, it's crazy if you think about it, because the simple fact of whether it's built into the fabric of the house or it's just something that's sitting in a room would have enough come in there. There's a great story a few years ago on one of the, like inspiring stories coming from America websites, Jewish stories about, it's actually quite a good story about this frum man in some place in somewhere American, bought this like really old, beautiful table. It's a desk. And he opened the drawer and he finds like a huge wad of cash. And it's how he tracked down the original owner of the table from the giant and how he returned this thousands of dollars. And it's a beautiful, beautiful story. So in that case, you could also argue it's similar to this, but here it's clear the safe is attached to the very fabric of the house. And according to the Shulchan Aruch and how we understood that, and the Gemara, if it's attached in, boom, it goes with the sale of the house. But if it's not, if it's just a removable thing, then it could now go back to the original owner. Let's go forward. Let's go to source 4 in the sheets if you're looking at it. Do I want to do that Pischei Tshuva? No, that was part of the Mezuzah. Fine. Source 4, which is in the middle of page number 2. I will share my screen. So Adkam, something is a part, something attached to the house is definitely a part of the sale. Where is my screen share? Here we go. Let's jump to Bava Metzia. Right. Now, this is a big klal. This is a really important principle in Jewish law, and it's as follows. We'll go from the Amar Rabbi Yossi Rab Chanina Chatzeiro. This is these rabbis speaking. Chatzeiro shel Adam koine loy shalom idasei. A person's property, his chatzer, literal translation of chatzer is courtyard, but a person's property, their courtyard, let's read the English. A person's courtyard affects acquisition of a property for him even without his knowledge. Now, this is quite complicated if we take it all the way, which we're not going to do, but just the principle of it. Your field, your chatzer, your courtyard, your back garden, for want of a better word, even without you knowing about it, acquires property on your behalf. Let us explain a little bit from that Gemara. Let's keep going. Link to that, just because we need the other piece of Gemara in order to explain that. I'm going to come back to that because really what it could be there is potentially if you go into your back garden and you see a football, as I'm sure it's happened to many of us with back gardens. Now, it could have come in our house, it could have come from the garden opposite to the left or to the right, or anywhere else in between. If you're back onto a park, I mean, it could literally be anyone's ball. Are you obligated to return the ball, or could you not say hachatzer, your property is koine, acquires shalom idat without knowledge? So by virtue of the fact it's now ended up in your property, does your property acquire it? That's it appears to be. That's what the Gemara is saying. So if you find a ball in your house, and it's not obvious that it belongs to one of your neighbors, if you see that yellow ball that the kids next door are playing with, all of a sudden it appears in your house, it's a pretty good chance it's going to be that neighbor's. And, please, sir, can I have my ball back? Many of us have done that as kids and many of us have experienced that before. But the next link to this is very, very important. This is actually a Mishnah. And the Mishnah says, if one found lost items in a heap of stone rubble or in an old wall, these belong to him. Stay with me. I'm going to explain all of this. If one found lost items in a new wall from its midpoint and outward, they belong to him. And if you follow it all, it's going to be complicated. I'm going to make this very simple in a second. If he found the items from its midpoint and inward, they belong to the homeowner. You've all read these sources in preparation to the shir, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to skip going through every word and just explain what's happening. The principle of this Gemara is, to some extent, finders keepers. Finders keepers. If you have a wall in your property and it gets knocked down, and inside that wall you find treasure or objects that are worth something. So if one found the object in a new wall, at a certain part of that wall, and we're going to understand, there's going to be something that is assumed to have been recently placed there, or something that is assumed to have been there for quite a substantial amount of time. That's the Gemara. That's what the Mishnah seems to be saying. It's mechalik. It's making a differentiation. There's a difference between a object that is found in a concealed place that was there recently, and it's obvious that it's recent, or potentially that it was there for quite a long period of time. And we're just going to finish this one last source on the next page, and then we're going to explain everything. The Gemara is explaining it. The Mishnah teaches that if one found a lost item in a heap of rubble or an old wall, it belongs to him. So that's what the Mishnah says. If you find something, finders keepers. We need to understand what that means, but it seems to be saying if you find something that's concealed, you can keep it. The sages taught in a brisa, so the Gemara is now going to discuss the parameters of this. It is his, i.e. the keeper, the new person, due to the fact that the owner of the heap or wall claims the property. The finder can, sorry, I'm reading too quickly for my own good. When the owner of the heap or wall claims the property, the finder can say to him, are these not just very old, right? And the Gemara asks, is this to say that the Amorites conceal items but Jews do not conceal items? Okay, this is very, very nuanced. The Gemara says, no, let's just finish off. The brisa is necessary only in the specific case where it's extremely rusted, meaning, okay, and I'm sorry that it's not clear. I'm going to take the screen off because you have to, I apologize, when you prepare these shares and you're doing so many things and it all makes sense. Now I'm presenting it to you, I can see how it's not clear. Let me just say that the Gemara is saying something very, very, very important. When you find something that was concealed and you have a claim of ownership on that, the Gemara is being machalik. It's discussing the parameters, making a difference, a chiluk between two scenarios. One, something you find that is relatively new, and something that you find that is relatively old. What's the nafka min? What's the practice? What do you think? Let's just open it up for a second. What's the difference between the two? Something you find that's relatively new and something that's relatively old. It's quite simple. What do you think? Anyone? Anyone with me? Go on, Salvador.
That the recent one belongs to the previous owner. An old one is very difficult to identify the owner.
But excellent. And even if it was difficult to identify the owner, what's even more of a something that's profound about that? Arthur, you want to say something?
I was going to say, I agree with Salvador, but I would go a step further. If it's old, then even if the owner was the previous owner, they've forgotten about it completely. Whereas if it's new, it's probably still in their minds. Oh,
now should that make a difference if you've forgotten about it? Let's just say I owe you 20 quid. I owe you 20 quid, and you forget. It might be owing, might be a bad example, and you forget about it. 20 years passed. Do I still owe you 20 quid?
Yes.
Yes. If I own something and I forget that I own it and I lose it, but it's still mine, I own it, but I forget about it, it's gone, and someone finds it, is it still mine? Or is it just, it's just got my name in it? Is it still mine?
If it's got your name in it, then it's still yours. If, on the other hand, the name has deteriorated so that you can't actually be certain it is yours. So if it was, you just saw the L and a few letters in between, but you can't work them out, and an E, you could guess it says Levine, but you can't be certain. So you've given up on it.
Good.
I guess the thing is, it's not forgotten about it. It's the difference between giving up on something and forgetting something.
Good. Okay. Someone else is waving their hands at me, or did I make that up? Okay. So really, what we're talking about here is a case of, and I think I agree with everything you're saying, but the Gemara is making a distinction, which means it's not so simple. Nothing ever is, right? So you find something. So if we plug this back into our case for a moment, what would you argue? It's old or it's new? Old. Can you hear the singing in the background, by the way? Go on.
You find it. If it's it depends where you find it. If it's close to the surface, close to some part of the wall or whatever, it's likely to be fairly recent. Therefore, you can identify that is from the previous owner. If it's buried or deeper in the wall or further away, it's likely to be an old item and difficult to identify to whom it belongs.
But in our case, Salvador, we know who owns it, but is it not old? By virtue of the fact that it went through 12, 15, 20 years of just being left there, is that not forgotten? Is that not like gone, finished? That's not a recent thing. If the middle guy would have found it a year into the sale, that's new. But we're talking about it's been through one over for 7 years. Now it's gone to the next owner for several years. So we're talking about something that's 15, 20 years at least that untouched. So we could argue it's old. And therefore it's interesting, even though we know where it belongs to, it could be from what is being said here, from this Gemara, that really the new person keeps it. Why? An old treasure, the finder keeps it. Tosfos asks a beautiful kasha. It's in the sheets. We're not going to go through it inside. He asks a beautiful kasha. Two of them ask a huge kasha on this. It says as follows. Surely it's always the keepers, the finders. Surely isn't that what we're saying here? Why would the fact it's old got to have anything to do with it? Surely it should all isn't the new old. If you can find out where it came from, give it back. If you can't, keep it. I mean, what's it got to do whether it's new or old? That's one of the questions that's asked. But Tosfos and the Mordechai also in the sheets, which we're not going to read the side, because it's going to take us too long to break our teeth over what they're actually saying. Rather, I'm just going to tell you what they're saying. And if you want to ask me questions on it, please feel free to go ahead afterwards. But they ask as follows. They ask really importantly. They say there is something different when it comes to something that is concealed, that is not matsui. It's not normally found there. Right? A ball in my back garden, it's matsui. I would expect to find balls or a kite or, I don't know, children in my back garden, right? I wouldn't expect to be cutting the grass, find something in the ground, dig up something 6 feet under, well, maybe not 6 feet, 2 feet under, and all of a sudden there's a box of buried treasure. That's not masui. That's not normal. I wouldn't expect to find that. If I find something that's hidden deep inside a wall, that's there, but dafka being placed to hide something, and that's not matsui. That's not something that's normally found. So it says Tosfos, and says the Mordechai, in their understanding of this Gemara and their understanding of Halacha, there is something different when it comes to what we're going to call hidden treasure. Something that isn't normally found in a place has its own set of rules. And therefore, we remove it from the klalim, the principles that the Gemara brings, that the Shulchan Aruch brings, that talks about whether your field owns it or not automatically, whether it's in the sale of the house automatically, because it's not normal. And anything that isn't normal in Jewish law seems to have, in many cases, its own category. There's a great halacha that talks about something that is blown over in a wind, right? If the wind is normal. So if you're trying to, let's say, light a candle on Hanukkah, right? Or Shabbat, let's say Hanukkah, right? So if you light your Hanukkah candles outdoors in Las Vegas, or in Los Angeles, most of the year you're getting beautiful weather, probably not a lot of wind, and it can light outside. I don't know, I've never been there, but I assume in nice weather countries where there's not a lot of wind. But if you're doing it in Alaska, in the height of winter, it's going to blow out automatically because you know there's going to be a situation with the wind. So when you light your candles in a situation that you know it's going to blow out, then you can't light your candles there. But if you light your candles in a situation where it shouldn't blow out, and all of a sudden, from absolutely nowhere that you can't predict, a gust of wind comes miraculously and blows it out, you're not responsible. You did your best. I don't know why I'm talking about this. I'm just trying to show you when halacha has a place for things that aren't normal, things that are beyond the scope of what you would expect. And this comes up now when it comes to the case of the hidden treasure. Again, this is the Tosfos and this is the Mordechai, two of our prominent Rishonim, prominent medieval halachic authorities that just want to be mechalek. They want to take a different stance on this topic, but we are not finished yet because that's them. Then we have someone like Rambam, right? Rambam Maimonides, who has a totally different perspective on this. Is going to bring in something that someone mentioned. I'm glad you mentioned it because Baruch Hashem, it shows that even in 2022, we can be on the same thinking lines as these great medieval scholars. The Rambam says something, again, we're going to leave the sources for the moment, says something quite profound. He talks about the concept of Yeyish, Shalom Midat, and Yeyish. What's Yeyish? Yeyish is a principle in the Gemara, Bava Metzia. In fact, it's one of the first Gemaras I ever learned. This perek of Eila Metzias, which is, I think, the second perek of Bava Metzia, when the kids are 10, 11 years old, in the yeshiva system, this is the first Gemara they learn. And they learn the principle of, if you find a lost item, if I'm walking down the street and I find a pen, yeah, this is a nice Parker pen. So if I find this on the street, I'm walking down Belmont Circle and I find a pen. I look at the pen, I have to decide, do I have to find the owner? Should I leave it there or can I keep it? Right, that's the Gemara discusses. It's very complicated. We're not going through the whole thing. And one of the principles the Gemara speaks about is there a concept of Yeyish? Yeyish literally means despair, meaning part of the not theology, part of the understanding, part of the thought process of whether I can keep this is, has the person that lost it given up hope that they will find it? And that's very important. If I find something and I can assume Yeyish, I can assume despair, I can assume that, it's gone. If £20 is missing from my wallet and I've had a little look around, I can pretty much assume I ain't going to see that £20 again, right? It's fallen out of my pockets. And that's not because I assume everyone out there is evil. I just assume that it's fallen out somewhere. No one knows who I am. It's got no simanim. It's got no signs that it belongs to me unless you happen to write your name in big bold letters on every single note of money that you have in your wallet, which is unlikely. So there, I would assume, yes, I would assume that it's forgotten about. The pen, I don't know. If I have okay, this is slightly nicer than a big pen, but if I've got a nice pen and I'm walking on the street and I know it's in my pocket and I've gone shopping, 100, it's gone. I'm not going to get that. I would assume Yeyish, right? The Rambam brings out a principle. So when it comes to the hidden treasure, I'm going to make sure my notes are correct. Should we read it in English? It's we won't go through the sources now because I'm paraphrasing the Rambam, also Rosh, which I bring on the thing. But they talk about the treasure being, what if this treasure is forgotten about? It's forgotten about to the point that there is Yeyish, there is despair. Meaning, this is part of the idea of why the length of time it's been there actually is a factor. Because once it's been there a long time, we can, under certain situations, assume Yeyish, assume that the people that originally owned it are no longer thinking about it. They've despaired, it's forgotten. And says the Gemara in many places, when there is Yeyish, when there is despair, the person that finds it can keep it. So says the Rambam, gives a beautiful example from a Gemara, again in the sources, in Bava Metzia, source number 10. You can look at it. It says as follows, and this actually happened. So one of the reports that I read after one of these big hurricanes is that there was hurricane in one of the towns on the, was it New Orleans, when there was that awful weather about 10, 15 years ago, and things were being washed out from the sea and things were appearing in people's back gardens on their properties that they'd never seen before, and they didn't know whose it was. So the Gemara speaks about, it's called a Shatsfernar, a ship that, or a boat, probably not a ship, a boat that lands in your property. It appears in your property. Now, it sounds crazy, but if something is washed out from sea and you live near a sea or you live near a huge lake and there's really bad weather, things could appear in your property. So the Rambam says, and it goes through understanding Gomorrah, and you have to go and understand every principle. I'm just learning the principle out with you without going through the Gomorrah and what the Rambam says. But he says, the assumption is I have to return a lost object, and he's being specific in the verses from the Torah. I have to return a lost object that people are looking for. But if no one's looking for it, because if you've got a ship in a marina that belongs to you, and there's huge storms and bad weather, and there's carnage, God forbid this happens, but it does, right? And there's carnage, and you come back and you find your ship's gone, it's not there, and like there's damage everywhere, what are you probably going to assume at that point? Insurance, right? It's gone. It's finished. I'm not getting that ship back. It's out at sea. It's in pieces. So the assumption is no one's looking for it. What is there? There is Yeyish. So if you find something in your property that is of value even, but yet it's unlikely that anyone's looking for it, what can you do? You can keep it. Right? Now, this is all relevant to our case. Right? I'm going to bring everything together. I'm going to read you what the Shulchan Aruch paskins on all of these scenarios. It's the last source on the page, just to, here we go, share. Last source, and you can all spend your entire evenings checking up on me, make I've said everything correctly, even though some of it I've said isn't actually not on the sheets. So the Shulchan Aruch, source number 11, that your field, your property, your courtyards can acquire other property for you, even without your knowledge, right? So once it's ended, once it lands in your property, it becomes yours, like the football in the back garden. Right? And if something falls into the property, it becomes yours. What are we talking about? Okay, we're the underlining. Something that is not necessarily always found there. Your field, your property does not acquire that for you. Even if, okay, well, this again, I don't want to get too complicated. The Shulchan Aruch seems to paskin, particularly that your field doesn't automatically acquire for you. But we've seen. I'm going to summarize essentially 5 or 6 opinions that we've seen, right? And then we're going to decide how we're going to paskin for our dear Shaila. Firstly, we saw something attached to a property that is in a sale. It stays in the property and it goes and transfers to the new buyer. That was the first thing we saw. Then we saw the idea of finders, keepers, but only if it's old. If it's new, lav dafka. Then we saw that the Tosfos and the Mordechai that talks about the treasures that don't belong in a place, right, can never really be acquired by a person, and they always really have to go back to the original owner. Then we saw this idea, like the Rambam talked about Yeyish, talked about despair, and the assumption if something's quite old, right? If something's quite old, then really there's despair, and therefore the new buyer, the person can keep it. And then we saw the Shulchan Aruch that says really just now that really most of these things belong to the original owner. So I can count out of those 6 opinions I've just given you. I made my notes. 4 of them, oh no, it's 3 and 3. 3 opinions say it's the original owner that owns the safe, right? The family everything in there belongs to him. And 3 of the opinions say actually the new buyer owns everything. Are you following me? Is anyone with me? Is this making any sense? I've tried the best I could. I mean, these are years of like learning that people go and specialize in to try and come up with this stuff. And I've tried to, I don't have those years of learning in this topic. And I've tried to throw it at you in 45 minutes without going through the sources properly. But I've tried to kind of give you a flavor to some of the different aspects that have, if nothing else, just to show you the sensitivities that Jewish law has to things and how it approaches these different things. I said at the beginning, by the way, just worth reiterating, especially if anyone came in a bit late, that we always have to be a mensch. So if you find something that is definitely not belonging to you, regardless of whether you want to come out on the side of really is mine, because it's like the boat that ends up in the thing, or it's like my field that acquires things for me, even if it isn't special, whatever. I'm going to be a mensch, right? I'm going to try and track down the original owner and do it. But there becomes where it gets interesting is that A, do I have to? B, maybe I have to. Maybe that's how halacha ends up. However, let's say the guy passed away. And let's say the family are hard to track down. And let's say I open the safe and there's a lot of money in there. And really I need to track it down. Do I have to hire private investigators to go and track them down? Because the halacha says, that's why it's important to understand. It could be, listen, I do my hishtadlus. I do my best. I put an advert in the Jewish Chronicle. I put it up on Facebook. Try and track down. But there's a limit to what I have to do because Jewish law says, actually, I don't have to, but I want to be able to. So that's why understanding where the law is and which side of the fence, which side of the line I sit on in terms of my obligations might affect exactly how I act in a given situation. Any questions? Is it clear? It's clear that we haven't given an answer. Is that true? But I've given you lots of different options to different answers. So you can decide yourselves. If you were Arthur Weiss is going to ask me a question, but if you were being asked that question, you might say, phone your local Orthodox rabbi, or you might say, well, actually, I went to a shir from Rabbi Levine, and he said loads of really interesting things, and actually, you've got what to rely on either way, as is many. Arthur, please ask your question.
It's not so much a question. I'm just thinking of practicalities, because if you think about the Holocaust and people buried candlesticks, valuables, in the hope they'd be able to come back, and sometimes it's uncovered, and the heirs come back, or there's all these paintings, or, forget the Holocaust, there's also Kafka's papers that were left to somebody else, and Kafka said, I want these to be destroyed, and they weren't. So there's all these sort of questions. What do you do with these discoveries? Who owns them? And I think that's what the Kafka thing, that's what the court decided.
Fabulous. Let me share with you phenomenal insights. Thank you for sharing that. And let me just share with you this a magnificent insight into the nuances in halacha and how it has a practical ramification in this. So we talked about yeyish, despair. So if you find something before yeyish, before despair, right, you're not allowed it. That's simplified halacha. Even if yeyish exists later, under many circumstances, when it comes into your hand, it comes into your hand a bit isur, as at the wrong time, meaning you can't have it. Even if yeyish exists later. So let's take something old that's lost. Let's take the safe as a good example, right? Because it does come up a little bit from the safe issue. Let's say the safe. Let's just say at the time of which the middle guy, Reuven, the intermediary owner, when he had it, let's say there wasn't yeyish. Let's say the guy just forgot, but he forgot it was there as part of the sale. But the second he realized there was no yeyish, right? There was no despair. So it can't be Reuven's because when he's taken the ownership of the place, the original owner hasn't had despair. But by the time it gets to Shimon, the last guy, there has been despair, and therefore it could belong to Shimon. They relate this back to the Holocaust, because what about the properties, as you say, right? What about things that people had? So at the time when they buried them, or at the time where they were kicked out of their homes, there was no yeyish because they wanted to come back. Not only did they want to come back, they believed they could come back, and they hoped and prayed they were going to come back. So when the new owners, i.e. the people that chat whatever it was, took ownership of it, took literally either stealing is a bit harsh because it wasn't fair to say everything was stolen. It was just left so people acquired it, right? Well, you could argue there was no yeyish at the time of the acquisition. There was no despair because the people at that time actually wanted it back. 20 years later now, 50 years, 70 years, there are many legal cases been going on over recent years. I was speaking to someone in Lublin who was trying to reacquire the property, his family property. They had 2 or 3 houses in Lublin. They were an affluent family 75 years ago. Everything was gone. They all cut the locals took their houses, but they managed to find some remnants of some paperwork to prove. They're trying to prove it. So you couldn't argue, oh, there's yeyish now, right? You couldn't argue that because at the time in which they lost it, there was no yeyish. So I think it's exactly what Arthur's saying. So there are practical ramifications of exactly the sentiments of the person at the time of losing, not just how we look at it now because it was old. So if you followed that, then you deserve a medal, because I don't know what I just said. But I think I know what I said, but I hope I explained what I was saying. Arthur, does that, based on what you said, does that make sense? Good. Thank you for that. Anyone got any other questions? No? Neil? Is that
sort of a little story on the theme of finding a safe in a house when you've bought it. I had a friend of mine recently acquired a house and started doing some renovations and discovered behind a wall that was wallpapered over that there was a safe in the wall and it was locked. So they had to get a locksmith. What was more distressing probably was how quickly and easy it was for the locksmith to open this safe in the wall. But actually there was nothing in it, so they didn't have the debate. It had been concealed for probably.
I think any one of us would, yes. The first natural thing we would do would want to try and find the owners of anything that was found in there. And if you can't, you can't. Cynthia, and then Salvador had something as well.
When we moved one house, when I was growing up, we moved into one house and we were doing some renovations and had to dig up the floorboards, and we found quite a bit of stuff. And one thing in particular was the most beautiful vase, which had gilding all the way around it. And I mean, I don't know who, we never found out who it belonged to or anything. We had it for quite a long time. I don't know whatever happened to it. It was a really lovely Grecian type vase.
There you go. Thank you. Salvador? Thanks, Cynthia.
Me. No, I was just, how do you define despair? Because what one person might feel desperation about, another person might be, oh, well, you know.
It's a good question. It's a bad translation for what I'm trying to say. The word Yeyish means despair, but the principle is you've given up hope. Yes, that can be subjective as well, but therefore Halacha has to deal with what is normal subjectivity. So we're not talking about emotional despair specifically. We're talking about at what point do I assume it's not being looked for? So there's Yeyish. Again, it means despair, but without the emotion. Or it could be emotion.
Giving up. Yeah.
Giving up to like, come on. Like the £20 note that falls out, you get home, like you have a good look for it, realize that you're probably not going to see it again. So it's gone. That's Yeyish. Bernice.
Well, I have a nice story. It's not my story, but a survivor I knew named Joseph Pearl, who was a Bushy member. His family hid a Sefer Torah in Poland before, as the Nazis marched in, and it was returned, and it is now at Bushy Shul, and it was returned in time for his grandson's bar mitzvah.
Oh, how lovely!
And I just happened to be there on the day. It was a very emotional morning.
Can you imagine?
Oh wow!
Yeah,
very nice.
But I don't know the details. His son might know. Sadly, Joe passed away, but his son might know the story behind the Sefer Torah.
Great, I've got a great story, very, very, very briefly, that someone once told me of a shul in Australia, where, I mean, Australia had so many Holocaust survivors, and so many went out to live out in Australia. There was one particular person, a survivor, who wanted a particular Sefer Torah bought from another shul in Australia, one of his cousins, his grandson's bar mitzvah. And this particular man was called up on that Shabbos and just couldn't say the brachas. He was so emotional. And he told the story afterwards that the reason there was so much emotion behind that Sefer Torah is that specific Sefer Torah was there in Poland, their family Sefer Torah, and how they fled the Nazis in Poland and then ended up in Amsterdam. But in order to flee, when they were told they had to leave their homes, they were told you can only take what you can carry. And there was an argument immediately in the family, like how precious the Sefer Torah was. So they said, we can't, it's valuable, it's going to take someone to, basically one person can hold that and nothing else. So they decided to take it apart. They literally unweaved the entire Sefer Torah and wrapped the parchment around various parts of their family member's body.
Oh my gosh.
Right, so arms, legs, and he said they walked out as a family the entire Sefer Torah. So they could carry things that were as valuable for differently. When they moved to Amsterdam, they put it back together and managed to use it for a bit of time until the Nazis eventually got into Holland, and they buried it whole in the courtyard of the shul or something like that. I can't remember the exact details of the story. And eventually, after the war, they managed to find it, and it got to Australia because there were two cousins that shared ownership of it. And I think the other cousin had done all the work to get it there, but he wanted to use it. He said that Sefer Torah we carried in our body out of Poland, and then it survived so much. Now that's the heritage, that's the legacy I leave to the next generation. But a similar vein. But there are probably plenty of these amazing stories. Salvador, you wait. Salvador,
some of you might have heard the story that Helen Stone tells on Bernice. Perhaps you've heard it on Holocaust Memorial Day when she used to come and speak to the children. That Emmy Golding, who was her mother, when they had to flee, they buried a Chanukiah. They gave a Chanukiah, I think, to a neighbour who hid it for them.
I think the story was that the neighbour saw it twinkling after Kristallnacht. It was, I think it was in the ashes, and I think she picked it up and took it home.
And returned it to the family eventually.
There's also the story Elvin tells of his mother burying, I think it was a suitcase with stuff in it. And thank God she survived and she managed to get the suitcase afterwards. Wow. Yes.
Guys, I have to make a move. Yes, I'm happy to leave you guys still chatting. I just I need to get to the next thing. But
okay.
Thank you so much. I hope that was of interest, and we'll see.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
As always, Rabbi. Very
treasure now.
Yes.
Everyone's going to go searching their homes, knocking down walls, looking for you never know. Okay, unless you build the house. Take care. Laila Tov, Bye bye.